Hello, I'm Evan with New Life for Old Bikes. Today we're going to take a look at a bicycle a friend of mine's daughter bought. She picked it up about 3 months ago and it seemed to have a few problems. Before we fix the obvious flaws, we're going to go ahead and check it out and make sure that there's nothing else we need to address. First, I'd like to address the obvious. The threads on the front axle are all boogered up. They're stripped from someone putting the wrong nut on. That nut is actually locked onto this side of the wheel. The bearings are very tight, I can feel them, and I'm hoping when we disassemble it, the only thing wrong is they've been tightened too much. We'll find out here shortly. Next, I'm going to address the brakes. I want you to notice when I pull the brake handle for the back brake, it touches the grip. These are going to need to be adjusted. Before we adjust them, however, we're going to pull a brake pad off of the back and just verify that they're in good shape. Based on the front brake pads, they should be. This particular brake takes a 6mm Allen wrench, so I'm going to pull a pad off and take a look at it. Oh, that's way too loose. Actually, the brake is in really good shape. Next, we're going to disconnect the cable on the V-brakes and check and see how freely they move. All I have to do on a set of V-brakes is grab the brakes, compress them, and remove the cable. It's that simple. Well, they don't move freely at all. I think we're going to have to take that apart and grease it. The next thing we're going to check are the shifters and the derailleurs to make sure they work. First, we're going to try the front one and see if it works. Alright, the front one works perfectly. Next, we're going to check the rear derailleur. Oh my, the shifter doesn't move at all. The cable does appear to be snug. That end of the cable moves, and the derailleur appears to be in good shape. This is going to either be a cable or a shifter issue. The first thing I'm going to do is address the stripped threads. If I can clean up the threads a little bit, I should be able to take this apart without cutting the axle off of the bike. And what I've been doing is running the nut back and forth over the threads to straighten this up. As you can see, I should be able to get this apart now. Unfortunately, the threads have been folded over and I don't dare put that on the bike. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to address the nut that is locked onto the axle. Let's see if we can get this off of here. By the way, the reason I'm using a crescent wrench or adjustable wrench on this side is because it's so big it'll give me a lot of leverage. And unfortunately, with as tight as this is, I need all the help I can get. There we go. Oh my, we boogered up the threads on that side. Next, let's go ahead and remove the lock nut and cone from this side. What I'm using is a cone wrench, and this thing is very narrow. I can slide it right in behind the lock nut. Then I'm using my 17mm wrench and I'm loosening it up. And fortunately, the threads are clean enough at this point where I can get the nut off of there. Next, let's go ahead and remove our cone and see what condition our bearings are in. I can already tell they're not that bad. There you go. Cone is off. The bearings have plenty of grease and they look to be in good shape. First, I put a towel on the floor in case I drop any of the bearings. Next, I'm going to use a magnet and I'm going to pull the bearings out of each side. There should be a total of 9 bearings per side. Alright, good. I'm using a magnetic tray so I don't lose anything. Oops. Good thing I had that towel to catch that bearing. I've cleaned all the parts with the solvent. My solvent of choice is mineral spirits. If the bearings had been really bad, I could have used lacquer thinner on there. If they were really nice and clean, I probably could have used a laundry detergent or a dish detergent and a toothbrush, and they would have come very nice and clean. We're going to wipe a fairly thick layer of grease inside the bearing cup. And I'm going to individually put each bearing back in place. You could use a pair of tweezers for this, but I find this just as easy. Next, I'm going to wipe a little bit of grease on the outside cone and slide the axle through. And do exactly the same thing on the other side. After I wipe a little bit of grease on the other cone ring, I'm going to screw it on down. Next, I'm going to screw the lock nut down. When tightening this down, the object is to have the bearing run smooth but not be too tight. Oh, that feels good. Before installing the tire, verify that it doesn't have directional tread. This one does, and I made sure that the arrow was pointed forward. This particular wheel has a 15mm nut, but you could easily use a crescent or adjustable wrench to do this job. Once you've got the wheel centered in there and tightened up, reconnect the brakes. V-brakes just slide right through the slot. The first thing I'm going to do is tighten the barrel adjuster all the way in on the top. Then I'm going to loosen the clamp bolt. This particular one takes a 10mm. I'm going to hold the brakes together, just let them loose just a little bit, and tighten the cable back down. Now, you don't want the brakes to be more than halfway to the handlebars, so we're now going to adjust the screw back out a little bit and test it again. And that looks good right there. The last thing we're going to do is push the wire in behind the brake so it doesn't get hung up on anything. If there's enough cable here, slide it through one of the holes in the brake. Next, I'm going to reinstall my back brake pad. Clamping the brakes together, and I'm going to determine where that brake pad is going to hit the wheel. Once I've got it where it needs to be, I'll snug it up and then completely tighten it while I hold it. Very good. And the other side looks good. The other thing we want to address on this back brake is the fact that they're a little bit stiff. So what I'm going to do is disassemble it and grease the pivot points. I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's some surface rust around this bolt. Unfortunately, this was too tight for me to use an Allen wrench, so I'm using a hex head socket on a socket wrench to break it free. Once you have the bolt out, just wiggle this side of the V-brake off. And there's our problem right there. A little bit of surface rust. I'm just going to clean it up with some steel wool. There we go. Once I get the shaft nice and clean, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on it. When you look down, there are 3 holes, and there's a pin right here on the back of the brake. Now, if your brakes are too stiff, you can move it up or down to loosen it. First thing I'm going to do is take the wire out from the back. I'm going to start by putting this in the middle hole. And we'll adjust from there if need be. Now I'm going to put the clamp back on it. That is too loose. So we're going to try it in a different hole. Much better. Once we get this tight, we'll go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. Again, I'm using my hex head socket on my socket wrench. And let's wiggle that off. Let's get this one cleaned up and put back together. Again, I'm going to release this spring on the back of the brake. There we go. I'm going to make sure that I install it in the same hole that I installed the one on the other side. There we go. Slide the spring back in. That should be wonderful. And let's get this tightened up. Then we're going to connect the cable back up. Before I make any adjustment to the back, I'm going to screw in the barrel adjuster on the brake handle all the way. Next, we're going to go ahead and loosen this nut right here. I'm going to pull the cable tight and then release it just a little bit and tighten it back up. Perfect amount, but if you'll notice, this side of the brake doesn't hardly move. On the side of the brake, I want you to notice there's an adjustment screw. As you tighten it in, it'll move the brake further away from the wheel. And it sometimes requires a combination of tightening one side and loosening the other. Much better. The last thing we're going to do is neaten this up a little bit by pushing the cable back through. There we go. That looks a whole lot better, and it won't catch you on the leg while you're riding. I suspect the cable on the rear derailleur is the problem with the shifting. I can pull back here and it moves freely, but if I go up here and pull it, I can't move it at all. I suspect the cable is probably frayed somewhere in this cable housing right here. So we're going to loosen it up and slide the cable housing out, see what it looks like. I'm going to loosen this binder nut and release. Wow, that was loose. All right. I'm going to release the cable. The next thing I'm going to do is cut this cable end off so I can pull the cable through. This particular bike has grommets welded on the frame for the cable, and all you have to do is pull it off. I'm pulling the cable out of this next section. Hard to see, but there's a little corrosion on that. And when I check the shifter, it seems to work. I'm going to go ahead and clean this cable and reassemble and see if it doesn't work. Where the cable goes through the frame, I'm running over it with some steel wool just to knock the corrosion off. If the corrosion was very serious on this, I would replace the cable. I'm putting a thin layer of waterproof grease on the cable. The purpose of this is simply to prevent the cable from corroding again. Next, I'm going to slide the cable back through the housing. There we go. Spread a little grease on the back section of the cable. It didn't appear to be a problem, but we might as well do it while we're here. Pull the cable through the binder and tighten it up. Make sure there's not a lot of slack in the cable. There we go. That's better. And tighten the binder bolt up. Once we've got everything connected back up, we're going to test this to see if it works. Well, how about that? Problem solved. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget, like and subscribe.